So hello everyone, very warm welcome to our book group on Margery of Kempe. We've got to chapters 51, oh sorry, 41 to 50. It's going to be one of those nights, I can see. And I've really enjoyed reading these chapters. I hope you did too. I entitled them Margery Causes a Stir. And in a way, in this section, these chapters, there are three ways in which you could describe Margery as causing a stir. The first is very much about her clothing and what she wears. So there's a lot about wearing white. And then also she has this, if you remember when she was in Jerusalem, she had this sort of violent devotional reaction to seeing the Passion of Christ. And it seems to be above and beyond what people at that time would have experienced. So it's quite, it does make people stop and look. And in this section, we don't just get her sort of having a sort of devotional moment like that, but she actually seems to, in our eyes, like have a seizure or something. So it's quite violent, and a lot of people stand around and have a look. And finally, the last few chapters, I hope you were all as proud of Margery as I was, where she stood up to the religious and the civic authorities of the time in this kind of new Margery, really. So those are the three areas in which she causes a stir. But I wanted to focus tonight on the first of those, which is wearing white, because I couldn't help but just stop and think and say, look, what is this big deal about her wearing white? What's the problem? Just let her wear what she wants. So I thought we've got to go into this a little bit further and find out what's really going on behind it. So it's interesting that Margery, throughout the text that we've been reading so far, has had an interesting relationship with her clothing. Right at the beginning, we are told, I think it's in about chapter 2, that she wore very flamboyant, showy clothes. If you remember, I think it was one of our first slides we had to show you was some pictures of ladies of that period and what they may have looked like. But Margery tells us how flamboyant she was and how she had gold piping on her headdress and she had hoods tagged with tippets. Those amazing words. So she tells us that she wore enormous finery, and it was very important to her at that time. Now, at that time, clothes were worn very much as a mark of wealth and position. It used to be said, the case of here in England, that you could tell someone from how they dressed. Whereas actually that's much harder to discern when people often turn up, a little bit like me tonight, turn up much more informally than they would in a formal. Whereas if I come in my dog collar, you would have all known, oh, there we are, that's the Canon Canterbury. So we don't display so much our titles within the clothing that we wear. There are obviously formal times where we have to wear formal items, but not generally in life anymore. But in the medieval period, it really was a big time then when you showed others exactly what kind of wealth you had and what status you were by what you wore. Now, it's interesting that Margery, right at the beginning, is quite it's really important for her to tell us the kind of things she's wearing, because it seems that she's showing us that she was a person of wealth, she was a person of standing, and that's the way she showed it in her culture, in her time, that she had expensive fabric, and that she could have a complexity of garments that were actually to show that this wasn't, this wasn't somebody just throwing on a kirtle or something. This was someone who had to be dressed. So it showed the sort of wealth that she had. And we're also told that she likes to look good, which is a very, very, human desire that runs all the way through history. But we have to put a little caveat on this at the beginning, because we could also argue that the way Margery is presenting herself right in these early chapters is that she's actually exaggerating the description of what she wore, because she wants to show that at this time she was full of pride and full of vanity. Now that's the message she wants to get across to us, that there was a time when she thought more about her appearance than she did about God. Now, if you think she's writing quite a long way, she's looking back, and it's quite a long way in advance. So we're very much getting an image of herself that is sort of given to us through the lens of time. So I think there is quite a strong argument to say that she may have well liked her clothes, but that for this text, she was hyping it up quite a bit, so that we get the sense that, this was someone who was obsessed. And it's going to show when she actually finds God in her life and what changes she's going to make. Which leads us on very nicely into the 3rd chapter, when we have heard about Margery's conversion. And again, this conversion is represented in what she wears. She tells us that she wears a hair shirt, and she tells us in a very lovely aside, I think you can really hear sort of Margery the person, that it was very uncomfortable and it was kind of scratchy. I mean, wonderful details. It must have been really horrible. But she tells us that she's wearing it because of panic. She's wearing it, because she wants to change her life. So she's doing this great penitential act. And one of the easiest ways to do that in a very physical, real way was in what you wore. So like many at that time, she wears it hidden underneath her clothing. It's a sign to her of her conversion to Christ. It's not about making a public display, which is very different from this idea that she is wearing clothes to show off who she is in a very public way. Then in chapter 5, actually, Jesus tells Margery that he wants her to take it off. And he says a lovely phrase like, I don't want you to wear a hair shirt on your body. I want you to wear a hair shirt, a hair cloth in your heart, which is very powerful and a very beautiful thing. And it's just something to ponder, I think. What does a hair cloth in your heart look like? So in chapter 15, Margery then has a vision in which the Lord proclaims to her, and this is very definitive, and it's about her vocation. Daughter, I say to you that I want you to wear all white clothes, and no other color for you, and no other color, for you shall dress according to my will. So she hears this really clearly, this kind of directive that she is to wear white clothes. Now, what do white clothes mean at this time? Well, in medieval times, a woman's status could be distinguished by their clothing, and we've already touched upon that. but particularly those who were religious and those who were married. So if you think of nuns and monks, they would be wearing a habit. But cloistered virgins would, by definition, who were unmarried, they were the only members in society who were permitted to wear all white clothes. So by wanting to wear all white, she's making quite a big statement about herself. She's aligning herself with those holy cloistered virgins. And of course, at that point, they were also considered the most holiest of people, because they had seen as the ones who had literally dedicated themselves, all body and soul and mind, to the love of God. They became seen as brides of Christ. And of course, that's exactly the way Margery has been talking about herself. She's been talking about herself as a bride of Christ, as married to Christ. And so there's something about what she wears that will be reflecting her inner state of who she thinks she is in relation to God, but also what is her vocation, which is to be this kind of marriage to Christ and lead that kind of singular, devoted life to him. And it's interesting that in chapter 11, she does convince her husband to actually allow her to live a chaste life. So she becomes to live a chaste life, but she's obviously still in a married state. She hasn't divorced her husband, and her husband hasn't died at this point. She's actually living a chaste life. So it's the closest, in the sense that she can kind of get within the state that she is, to having that kind of ideology of the holy virgins as she wants. But of course, you and I know that there was no way that Margery could be seen as actually being a holy virgin, because she tells us she's had 14 children. So she's not really able to do that, and she's not really able to kid herself that if she leads a chaste life, that suddenly she's going to be equated to one of these holy virgins. But that's what the intensity of what she's feeling about her relationship with God. At this time, it must also be said that the colour that that you wore would also denote your status. So whether it was very fine clothes for your wealth, but also the colour would show whether you were married or not. So the virgins, the cloistered virgins, were the ones who could wear white. But also married women would have worn much darker shades to show that they were married. So it was also for practical reasons, because it's easier in a world where there was very poor sanitation. It was much easier to keep darker colours looking a bit cleaner than white. And it was very hard, if you think about it, to keep clothes completely white if you were doing all the chores of a mother and a wife and looking after the house that someone like Margery would have been expected. So if you went around at that time in white clothes, it showed that, first of all, you were holy, a very holy person, but also that you were not involved in all those usual activities of the world that a woman would have been expected to do. So it very much speaks about a kind of impracticability of actually wearing white. So there's lots of different levels here. Now, when in chapter 15, when the Lord says to her, I want you to wear white, as I'm sure lots of this is passing through Margery's mind, because she knows she doesn't really want to do this, because even at that stage, she says that she's going to receive abuse if she does this. She's going to be accused of hypocrisy if she does this. And so actually, she kind of doesn't really fulfill the Lord's wishes at that point. And she says in chapter 15, and these are her words, "Dear Lord, if I go around dressed differently from how other chaste women dress, I fear people will slander me. They will say I am a hypocrite. They will say I am a hypocrite and ridicule me." And of course, that's exactly what we do see, not only in the section that we read tonight, but also later on. Now, regardless of this, there's another key moment which we need to just remember, is that later on, she does go to the Bishop of Lincoln, and it's the Bishop of Lincoln who gives her both a ring and a mantle to wear. Now, this completely equates with what would have been given to those cloistered holy virgins. They too would have been given a ring and a white mantle to show that they had consecrated their life to God. Now, if you think about it, a ring, to be given a ring would have been very similar to have been given a ring by your husband when you were married. But now, Margery is seen as marrying Christ. And so she's given a new ring, in a sense, to show that she is newly married to Christ, rather than replacing, I suppose, the ring that was given to her by her husband. And we've talked about this before, how increasingly in the text, it seems that Christ is taking very much the sort of role of the husband for Margery, in the way she talks to him, in the way he guides her, in the way he gives her advice, in the way he talks to her when she's having a wobbly, so they're sort of easy way of talking to each other, very much like a husband and wife. So though not technically a virgin, Margery does see herself, and therefore she shows to the world as this maiden married to Christ. And this is validated once again in a vision in chapter 21, where Christ himself says to Margery, "I love you, daughter, as much as any maiden in the world." So it's like saying, I see you in terms of being one of those maidens married to me. What's interesting is the section that we have been reading these last few days. We see Margery have a bit of a wobble about this core understanding of her vocation and who she is, and the way it's expressed in wearing white. We've heard she's received lots of abuse, and in a sense, good old Margery, she's taken it on the chin like a real trooper. But now in chapter 43, she goes to see an anchorite who I think she obviously knew, and he lives out in Chapel in the Fields, which is a reference to the College of St. Mary in the Fields, which stood just southwest of the city of Norwich. Now she goes to him to be humbled and to be chastened, to give her confession. But she doesn't really realize what she's going to have in store, because the person who she thought was very much her friend and she's on good relationships, that relationship has actually soured. And in a sense, he asks her a lot of very difficult questions. And one is about her clothing. Now he tells her that God says that he forbids her to wear white, as it just draws attention to her. Now she defends herself and refers to her own vision by defending herself to him. But then in chapter 44, she has this wobble. She has her doubts. So she asks God for a sign. Now, as with a number of episodes that have been in this section, there have been signs given to her to validate decisions which have been of a climactic nature, in the sense of rain or thunder or lightning, and it seems to be that, God is sort of backing up his words to her by sending these kind of cosmic forces. I mean, it's very Old Testament, of course. If we think about on Mount Sinai, God is present through the thunder and lightning and all that. And she asks for a sign to confirm her doubts, that she is actually fully intended to wear white. And there's a really lovely episode. And of course, there's a really lovely episode after this, because the Lord not only says, shows her the thunderstorms and everything and validates it to her, but then he says he'll send someone to actually provide for these clothes for her. And he says this wonderful, honorable nobleman. And you hear this episode actually expanded. It could have just been one line, this nobleman provided for my clothes, but it's not. It's this lovely little scene that is drawn about how he not only provides for her, but he goes and has them made and then presents her with this wonderful gown that she then wears on Trinity Sunday as if she's been affirmed once more as a holy woman. What's interesting about that that sort of expansion of that episode is that it shows that it's not like she's throwing a rag of white over her head, but that there's something intended, there's something dignified, there's her outward appearance is being treated as if she was a lady of manor. It's not showy, it's not in beautiful cloth, but she's being treated with the same courtesy and the same graciousness as if her clothes are going to show exactly her wealth and position. And they're not going to show her wealth and position, but they're going to show that she is one of these holy women who is loved and honored and respected, and loved and honored by God, but also to be respected. Now, I think that's quite significant, because after that, we go immediately into this sequence of chapters where Margery seems to have suddenly realized who she is. She has this amazing authority. She walks into very difficult spheres, not only of religious authority, but civic authority, and she utterly holds her own. Not a flap, not a problem. I get a feeling that like, if Margery was Prime Minister, she would just walk into the House of Commons and she'd just calm them all down and just say exactly the right words. It's a real turning point, I think, in the text, because from this moment on, Margery has found her vocation, but she's also found her voice. And that is to speak God's truth into places where God's truth is not being lived out. She is to bring repentance, and she is to save, in a sense, a savior sort of a figure in so many people's lives, and also in that of the authorities. Now, it's the authorities who have dragged her there, but actually, to give them their due, they absolutely love her. So she goes before the Abbot of Leicester and the Dean of Leicester, and she completely convinces them of who she is and of her holiness. So she's not only having God's validation of the way she lives, but she's also getting the validation of the religious authorities too. There was something in me that just wondered when Dean David here at Canterbury was back at Leicester, where he was the dean. I wonder what he would have made of Margery. I must ask him sometime and say, have you ever had a Margery figure come and you've had to, who's presented her life to you and taught to you like that? Anyway, that's a little aside, just me fantasizing a bit. Anyway, so so the only people who really don't accept her at this point are the civic authorities, so the mayor. So the mayor just does not buy her. And I wonder if what's going on with the mayor is that actually what he's getting upset about is that there is this woman. She's not under her husband's authority. She's being validated by the religious. She's not being overseen by a bishop. She's not being overseen by a religious order. She's a wild canon. What is she doing? And there's a real sort of skepticism and a real fear because she's bucking all the forces that would try to actually stamp their authority on her and put her back in her place. She's standing up and finding that they actually validate her. It's only the civic authorities who are saying, no, I don't like this. I don't like this woman. And they put her under house arrest, you know, and how awful it must have been for Margery having this extreme experience. And if you read to the end of that, the only reason that she gets out and that she manages to look after those who were around her is because she has this crucial letter from the bishop that validates her and her place as being above that of the civic authorities. So she kind of trumps the mayor with this letter. Now, how crucial is that for a woman in a society who doesn't really have a voice, who has to do what the husband or the father says, who really is only allowed to wear pretty clothes or whatever, is quite suppressed. And she comes forward and says, no one's telling me what to do. I'm married to God and I'm going to wear these white clothes. So it's like she's taken this sort of subordination of women within the domestic sphere and she's liberated it into the religious sphere. Now, that must have been quite worrying for a few people. And we're going to see that it's going to keep coming back. But what I find really outstanding about Margery at this time is that the quality of her conviction just makes her carry on. You know, you get the sense that she's got that conviction of the early martyrs. You know, you can yell at me, you can throw sticks and stones at me, you can burn me, you can do whatever you want to me, but I am God's holy servant, and he is my Christ, my husband, the one who I will take authorities from. And in those spheres, I think it's good old Margery. So fantastic. So that's my little ramble about white clothes. And in a sense, it's kind of gone over quite a lot of just about what she wears throughout and how important what she wears throughout the book. But let me find you once again. Let me share. Okay, so there are some questions to ponder for you. I'll leave that up for a few moments so you can all have a good look or whatever, take a picture or whatever is helpful. And while you're doing that, I will create some rooms. For those who head off at this point, lovely to see you. God bless. Take care.